really, really good to talk to you. You have been a valiant campaigner against lockdowns and against restrictions on our freedoms throughout the period of the COVID pandemic, always just pointing to clear stats, clear evidence around the world of not only the mission creep of every new measure that's brought in, seeing that in Wales right now. It's only for nightclubs, except it's not only for nightclubs now. Now it's for concert halls and cinemas and theatres as well. And of course, we're seeing more and more measures being brought in across Europe. Vaccine passports for going into a bar or a restaurant, then it's a shopping centre. In Italy, it's for even just going to work. We see that in Europe, in Australia as well. And the most, I think, just for me, the most shocking of all, Austria today bringing in a lockdown, but only for the unvaccinated. What do you make of it all?
I think what's happening is everybody is being corralled. We're being moved ever forward into a position where we're forced into taking a vaccine. Everybody has their line. It's where is your line? And if you start to tell the unvaccinated they can no longer have their lives, then it will be forcing more and more of those few that don't want to take it into complying. And what really offends me is that there's no coverage of any of these protests or demonstrations that are happening all over the world, from the Netherlands through to Austria, Geneva, Italy, America, London. There's nothing on the news. So people feel very alone. They think that they're just on their own. They've had COVID. They perhaps don't want a vaccine. So they'll go along and do it because they're so isolated. And they're not isolated. Millions of people are demonstrating against a tool of compliance that doesn't keep you safe. And in Austria, it's become a punishment.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And again, we saw this. I mean, Australia, I think, was really shocking to a lot of people. We've always thought of that as very much kind of, one of the lands of the free. It's turned into sort of, a prison ship to in lots of ways, and New Zealand as well. I think a lot of us were very surprised by that. But this is the thing. Earlier on, when the vaccines were developed and they were tested for whether or not they could stop you from getting seriously ill and dying. And they work really well at doing that for those who are at higher risk. Absolutely. I didn't hesitate going to get my 2 jabs, even though I'd had COVID. I thought, you know what, on balance, I think that's worth it for me. My daughter at 14, not vaccinated because she's had COVID. She's had it twice. She's not at risk of dying statistically. I mean, it seems to me quite absurd for a jab to be put into her when there is a risk of a small risk, but there is also her risk from COVID is so infinitesimally small as well. But then it became that the idea was that the COVID jabs were stopping you from infecting other people, so you were less likely to get infected, less likely to infect other people, and therefore that you had a duty of care to other people. That is increasingly not such a strong argument, given that the vaccines, we know they work to protect the individual who takes them. But with the Delta variant, you are also very, very likely to get COVID, just relatively easy. You are also able to pass it on at a lower rate, but not so significantly lower that would in any way justify some of the measures that are being brought in. Do you think a lot of these measures are being brought in regardless of the actual facts, regardless of the data? In which case, why are they being brought in?
They're being brought in as a punishment. It's to force people to take that final step, those people that don't want to have the vaccine. It cannot keep you safe. It can only act as a form of compliance. So if you look at something like Boardmasters, a big festival in Cornwall last year, it was a ticket-only, vaccine passport-only event, massive spike. So this isn't about safety, it's about control. It's about where is your line? At what point do you want your life back so much that you will take that step and have that vaccine? And it makes no sense to me whatsoever that they're vaccinating people in incredibly small risk categories. It makes no sense whatsoever, except, I presume, we don't want to talk about immunity in this country so that people don't go around licking each other and trying to get the infection on purpose, which of course, when universities offered kids 500 quid last year, when the pandemic was at the peak, obviously they all went out and went to lick each other. I do see. I'm not saying that some of the measures being taken aren't with everyone's best interests at heart, but they are absolutely incompetent. Totally incompetent.
But this is it, isn't it? The vaccine pass, there's no evidence whatsoever. I mean, the vaccine passports, people having to provide proof to be able to go to a bar or a restaurant or a supermarket even, or go to work, or to wear a mask. None of these things are proven to have any efficacy. There's loads of evidence that they don't work. A country like Germany, where they've had all these things repeatedly, and it's a very law-abiding. People are very. You don't jaywalk in Germany. People will grab you and say, "Don't." The light's red, even if there's no traffic. It's a very law-abiding society, and yet there they are with a big spike in cases, and yet there never seems to be any analysis by both politicians and indeed the mainstream media, which I think has just really fallen down on the job shockingly in the last 18 months, to say, well, hold on a minute, we think vaccine passports and masks will cut a spike in cases here, but it hasn't worked anywhere else, and not realising that maybe the evidence isn't in their favour.
And what I think is completely insane is that if you look at somewhere like New Zealand and Australia, who had a zero COVID policy for a long time, so they could see what was happening in other countries. They could see what was happening in Sweden and evaluate it, in Texas and evaluate it. And what did they do? They decided to go down the route that doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. Bernie Spofforth, really, really appreciate you joining me. Thank you very much indeed. I hope you'll come on the show again.